Yeah, so who are we? We are NIRx, and if you're not familiar with us, we have been in the fNIRS market for around 20 years, and in very few words, our main goal is to provide very, very good devices, very, very good platforms for research in neuroscience, mainly using near-infrared spectroscopy with a focus on customer support and a focus on ensuring that people get to their publications, people get their good data in a timely manner with a hassle-free experience. And most of you probably already interacted with us, but if you have any doubts about that, just interact with us and you'll see that we are laser focused on making sure that everyone is well equipped and well served with our equipment and our support. Today, oh yeah, sorry, our socials first. If you want to get in touch with us or want to keep up with what's going on, we have socials. We are in basically all of the social media networks. I guess we should update this one. It's no longer Twitter, it's X, but same handle will still get you to our profile there. But if you don't use social media like me, you can just scan this or go to our newsletter, and you will get a one email, two email max every other 3 months, let's say, where you will hear about our product releases, our users, research, upcoming webinars, and exciting news. The considerations for today are that you are muted by default, but you can ask questions at any time using the chat. This will be recorded and available to watch in our webinars page. And if you have further questions that, after the webinar, you're having dinner or taking your shower and you're like, oh, God damn it, I wish I had asked my question. You can always route your questions to us at support at NIRx. And if they're directly related to Dr. Dan Dewey's research, we can also route them to him so he can answer them for you after the fact. So all is good. Yeah, I've been talking for 5 slides, and if you don't know who I am, I'm Giovanni, or everyone just calls me Gio. I'm part of the support team at NIRx. And if you've ever interacted with us, you probably have heard from me or from one of my team members. And I'm joined by Kami, our magic and amazing marketing and events coordinator, who makes all of these things happen and works in the background to make sure that everything is running smoothly and that everyone gets their questions answered and that everyone gets in. But the star of the show, the star of today, is Professor Dan Dewey, who's the department chair of linguistics and directs the fNIRS Applied Linguistics Lab at Brigham Young University, or BYU. He has a PhD in second language acquisition from Carnegie Mellon, and his research centers on the social, psychological, and neurological factors that influence how individuals acquire a second language. His lab is primarily composed of undergrad students from linguistics, neuroscience, psychology, and BYU's language departments, and the aim of the lab is to get students trained in research methodologies and providing them hands-on experiences working with complex and real-world data, which is a lot of what he's going to talk to us about today. So without taking up any more time from you, Dan, I would hand over the mic. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Gio. Thanks everyone for being here. There's a few faces and names I recognize, so thank you. Give me 1 second here and I'll share a screen with you. So let's see, here we go. You should now see my PowerPoint up there that I'm going to use for this presentation today. So thanks, Gio, for giving that introduction. I wanted to mention or just sort of reiterate that I'm fairly unique, I think, in the fNIRS neuroimaging community in that my objective really as an fNIRS user is to train undergraduate students primarily in research methods, data collection, data analysis, and so forth. And So we have a fairly broad range of projects that we're involved in. I have very specific interests myself that I'll talk about. But as I said, I think we're fairly unique in employing so many undergraduates. We don't have any postdocs. Once in a while, we'll have a master's student involved in our lab, but we don't even have a doctoral program. So I'm very pleased and very proud of the accomplishments of our undergraduate students in our labs. So quickly, just so you have an idea for a little more of an idea for our emphasis, we teach 80 languages at BYU, and language and communication are emphasized in learning outcomes in any of our majors, pretty much any of our majors. So we take language pretty seriously. So today, so any study you hear about involves language in some way, and you're welcome to ask me questions about that if you like. Today, really what I'd like to do is first to just encourage or promote out of lab data collection. It can be pretty intimidating to move out of a more controlled environment and to work in places like we've been. But I want to encourage that. I want to talk about some of the problems that we've encountered and present some solutions to these problems. And you notice there's a number 4 there, which is again, again, and then again, and again. I'll keep encouraging you to just go out of the lab and collect authentic data in authentic settings. That's one of the real strengths of fNIRS. Um, so you're welcome to ask questions along the way. I do have a couple of pauses after I talk about each of the scenarios or settings where we've collected data. And so you're specifically invited to ask questions during those pauses. So quickly about myself, my PhD at Carnegie Mellon in second language acquisition was interdisciplinary. And I'm very grateful for the interdisciplinary training that I received there because it allows me to do a lot of the things that I'll describe today. I took courses and studied with and worked on my PhD with people in cognitive neuroscience, developmental psychology, artificial intelligence, language and translation, just a huge range of areas, and that has served me very well in the interdisciplinary work that I've done. My primary interest is social interaction and how people learn language through social interaction. So how children learn from caregivers, how adults learning a second language learn through interaction with other people. If you look at my Vita, I just, for some fun, had AI generate a quick word cloud with the titles of my publications, and you'll see that context, study abroad, uh, social networking, out of class learning, and those sorts of things come up often in the publications that I produced. When I was at Carnegie Mellon, there were people who were doing neuroimaging. You can imagine just with the fields that I mentioned, how many people will be doing neuroimaging on topics related to cognitive psychology and so forth. But at the time, no one was doing work with dyads. Even with an MRI, no one was doing work with dyads. EEG, very little work with more than one participant. And so while I wanted to do neuroimaging, I was more interested in the social interaction and didn't spend a lot of time thinking about how to neuroimage with multiple participants. However, some time ago, 5 or 10 years ago, I was doing some reading and came across articles focusing on parent-child interaction, where they'd done some hyperscanning with EEG and hyperscanning with fNIRS, and it caught my interest. And this is a NIRx photo, by the way. Same here, another photo. But what caught my interest was the fact that you could, in authentic such situations, scenarios where people were interacting for authentic purposes, you could neuro image in those settings. And so I was very interested in finding out more. Uh, Again, the advantages of portability, movement tolerance, cost effectiveness, ease of learning, usability for multi-person imaging. All those things caught my attention. And by the way, there are some QR codes throughout the presentation. If you miss them, you're welcome to just email if you're interested. But this just sends you to the article by Kerasima and Ferrari that has some good references on the advantages of fNIRS. So anyway, that caught my interest, and so we got a grant and we invested and purchased five NIRsport 2 units. And unfortunately, we did that right around the time of COVID. And so while I thought we'd get up and running and do neuroimaging and social settings right away, it took us a long time to get there. But eventually we did do that. And we moved beyond that. Um, in the meantime, while we were working on that, or while we were waiting for COVID restrictions to lift, we worked on some other projects that involve social scenarios. So if you teach using images that are social versus images that don't involve people, if you're teaching language in those situations, is language processed differently and do people learn the language differently? Some other things like testing by a person versus testing by a computer. Is one more effective than the other? Like if a computer just puts a prompt up there, or if a person asks you a question face to face, are the outcomes different, and is the neurological processing different? So I think a lot about not just ultimate achievement in terms of language acquisition, but route. How does a person go about acquiring language? And the neuro data that we acquire helps us to understand that better. So, so we did some of that, or thought about some of that in the meantime, but then eventually we moved out of the lab and into more authentic situations. And so what I'd like to do today is tell you about basically three projects that we carried out or that we were involved in or have been involved in over the past several years, looking at a variety of linguistic and cognitive issues and so forth. Um, I thought of just doing one, but I think that the three illustrate more broadly what can be done with fNIRS. And so I'm going to just quickly go through each of the projects. If you have questions, you're welcome to send me those questions. Let's see, here we go. So the first was in Ecuador. We were looking at speakers, indigenous speakers of Quechua, and looking at what's called an idiophone. And I'll tell a bit more about that. The second was in Ecuador also, where we were looking at child development. I specifically am interested in linguistic contributors to language development and to language development over time. And then the third is at BYU on campus, a storytelling project where we're having students tell stories, and uh, we're looking at how this connects people and creates a sense of belonging. And the title was From Classroom to the Amazon or something like that. But you'll see here the projects kind of go in reverse. I don't recommend throwing yourself in and going to the Amazon without trying imaging out of the lab first in some other setting. And so, but that's what we did. We jumped right in and went to the Amazon, and this is the group that I went with. So, very quickly, I can't overemphasize the importance of interdisciplinary teamwork. We could not have gone to the Amazon to collect data if it weren't for colleagues like anthropologist Todd Swanson, who has lived in Ecuador many years. He knows the indigenous people very well there, has great connections. He helped us with recruiting. He helped us with a variety of cultural aspects. My colleague Janice Knuckles in linguistics is an anthropological linguist who speaks Quechua and served as an informant and helped us a ton with data collection there. And then I went with another neurolinguist, Jeff Green, who's in the background here in this image. And this is one of our indigenous speakers that we worked with, who you can't see in this picture, but he has hair that's extremely thick. And when you bundle it together, it's about that thick in the back in a ponytail. Um, so anyway, idiophones, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but essentially idiophones are words that describe sound, movement, feeling, it's just so much. They're very, very rich. And linguistically, they've been kind of discounted or thought of as being not really worth studying even. But my colleagues thought that idiophones involve uh, really complex I guess, conceptualization. And therefore, they wanted to use fNIRS to neuroimage these native speakers and find out how they conceptualize idiophones in their minds, in their brains. So if you think of what an idiophone is, quickly in English, like buzz, splash, bang, those represent kind of sounds, but I do Japanese and there's one called that's pika pika. That's really a sparkling or shiny kind of thing. It's not a sound, but pika pika is, it's a notion, it's a concept of shiny and clean and so forth. So these are idiophones. So if you're interested, you can check out some of these videos. Indigenous speakers, the QR code will take you to this site where there's videos. So I know it's just I just showed a very small snippet of video here, but you notice a woman waving her hands. She's in the forest. She's waving her hands using gestures. So idiophones involve physical movement. They involve sense of smell, sense of taste, and so we imaged the motor cortices. We imaged yeah, it was almost a full brain image that we did because again, these idiophones are so conceptually rich. So if you're interested in this, you can take a look. The QR code here will take you to our paper in language and cognition where we report on this. But what the audience here I think is more interested in is how we carried this out and what the conditions were like in the Amazon when we neuroimaged there. So that's what I'm going to focus on and show you now. So you can see here, this is some of the housing that we worked in, or one of the facilities that we worked in. We were imaging. You see that there's a lot of forest around, that there's not a lot of light that comes into the structures. This is one of the bedrooms that we actually did some imaging in. You see that we get a little light from the window, and there's like one incandescent light bulb in the room. So people think of lighting as a problem. Well, in this case, guess what? It was too little lighting and not too much lighting because it's difficult to work in these dark conditions. So light was, yes, a challenge for us. But other bigger problems were heat and humidity, signal quality. I mentioned the dense hair. I'll show you some more images. Working with an indigenous community, I talked about how Todd Swanson was so invaluable there, how he explained to people and used metaphor to talk about what fNIRS was and neuroimaging and the concepts of light, and people were familiar with the fact that if you hold up your hand, you can see through your hand, and he would give a very nice explanation of what we were doing with the light. So you see here two women who have very thick hair. This is very typical. There's plenty of research that shows that the indigenous people there have coarser, thicker, denser hair than, say, North Americans would typically have, or Europeans would typically have. Even because they are, relatively speaking, in very remote locations, they typically, even their skulls tend to be thicker to help them protect them, just to protect their brains. So when you think of imaging through this, it's a challenge to get a very good, clear signal. So you'll see here my two colleagues, we thought we would be able to, and in fact, we at home in our labs, if it would take us to get a setup like this and get a good clear signal, max 10 minutes at home. And we were spending 20 to 30 minutes per participant just getting the caps on these people, just getting a good, clear signal, as clear of a signal as we could from these individuals. We unfortunately, you see a picture of gel on the left and you see carry-on baggage on the right. Think of the limitations when your gel gets confiscated or taken away when you go through baggage and you arrive in country with no hair gel or no gel to use in the hair. I had neuroimaged probably 50, 75 people before going to Ecuador. Never once had I used gel. But I was kicking myself thinking, why did I let the gel disappear? So we makeshifted. we found a clear shampoo, and instead we used clear shampoo to help wet the hair and use Q-tips to spread the hair so we would get through and get a pretty decent signal. So in addition to that, we did very extensive signal checking while we were setting up. We kept checking the signal as we went along. Um, we also ended up accepting lower quality signal from some channels on some participants because the fact of the matter was we just couldn't get better signals. Um, and ultimately, we were pleased. We ended up gathering data from more people than we had planned on because we figured we would end up throwing out a little bit of data due to poor signal quality. We ultimately used scalp coupling index, SCI, and in Satori, and we used also the GLM modeling took or takes into account, when you have different numbers due to the fact that 35 people, maybe you had a good signal in one channel, another channel you had only 25 people with a decent signal, and so forth. So anyway, that's how we dealt with that. So moving on to heat then, heat and humidity were huge factors in the Amazon. Um, so a lot of people don't realize that when you are charging something, it produces more heat within the whatever electronic item it is. It heats up more. So we would pre-charge everything and make sure that we didn't have things plugged in as much as possible while we were actually imaging, because we did actually have a laptop overheat. We had we sometimes were questioning whether we were getting good signals from our equipment, and as we monitored the heat levels on the NIRS units, we were worried about that at times. So again, just pre-charging and then not charging during imaging was something that helped us with the heat. We also, because things did need to charge, if we were imaging all day, take what we charged, we would unplug one thing and plug in one other thing. And if everything got charged once, even during the day, that was enough to keep us going. If you've never used the power troubleshooter in Windows, we closed down all other apps and used the power troubleshooter, and that was helpful for us. And where possible, we imaged during cooler times of the day, but we had no control over temperature. And you saw the structures that we were in. There was no climate control, no air conditioning. We just lived with whatever nature brought us. Humidity, we stored our equipment in dry boxes during breaks and overnight as well. And just made sure we used a ton of silica gel packets while we were there. So the other thing that we found out was this was our first experience using a full head montage over multiple participants, essentially all day long, running the equipment. Wireless at one point failed us. We're not sure why. I've talked to several computer engineers, electrical engineers, and others, and there are various hypotheses, but ultimately we just realized that we were better off using cables because we couldn't afford to lose signals in the middle of data collection. Fortunately, most of the data we think that well, I shouldn't say we think. I mean, the NIRS are good at saving the data, even if it's not getting transmitted to your laptop. So we didn't have a lot of data loss, but just to be careful, again, we opted to use cables instead of wireless. So that's that first experiment, or that first out of lab study that we did. Do you have any questions about that? Let's see. I don't see anyone asking to ask questions, so I'll go ahead and go on. Okay. So the next study was with Utah State University. We also went down to Ecuador. It was a larger team. We had people in my department in linguistics. We had people from child development, people from family studies, people who were interested in child psychology, people who were interested in family well-being and so forth who went down on this team. And there's an image of some of our group who went down. The first place we went was Shushufindi, Ecuador. There's an image of some of our participants with our group. The second place we went was outside of Coca, Ecuador. And what we were focusing on largely with that study was really child development overall. You can imagine I'm more interested in language and bilingualism and so forth, but these were some of the predictors we were focusing on: nutrition, family well-being, multilingualism, and so forth. There was a study, if you're interested, that my colleague Matt Cook presented in a poster in Birmingham at the fNIRS conference there. Um, and in that study, essentially, he looked at consumption of chicha, which is a beverage that's created by using from yucca plant. You can see the plant on the left, and there's a link to the site there if you're interested in chicha itself. But this QR code will take you to Matt's presentation if you're interested in looking at what he did and he found. But essentially, he found that there was greater connectivity for children who did not consume chicha. There's an alcohol content in chicha, and that's what's the biggest concern. Chicha has other nutritional substances in it and so forth, but the alcohol is a concern. And Matt, in his research or in his the piece of data that he analyzed, found that again there was greater connectivity for the children who did not consume chicha. So I showed you some of the setting. This just gives you a sense for where we were. Again, no air conditioning, no climate control whatsoever. This is the actual building that we worked in. You see there are a bunch of concrete walls with a metal roof over the top. So the problems we had were heat and humidity, again, electricity, light, signal quality, and team training and cooperation. We had a big team that went, and we juggled responsibilities between people. But the thing I love about fNIRS is that it doesn't take that much to train someone to put a headband or a cap on, especially if you're around and you're able to kind of support people and mentor them and so forth. So in terms of heat and humidity, this fan really is very similar to what we had. Electrical, we had one extension cord running across the gym and just one outlet in the gym. The village we were in had minimal electricity. There were 2 power outages while we were there. And so we used fans when we could, but they would often go out. So that was a challenge when the electricity would go out. We would pre-charge all devices. As I said before, we'd rotate charging between sessions. We'd shut down all non-essential apps as usual and use Windows Power Troubleshooter. And the other thing is we just grew to expect complications. And that's what I would say. If you're going to a place like this, you need to anticipate complications. And on this trip where we went to with this big group, there wasn't a spouse of one of our researchers who was an engineer. And between that engineer and me, we spent a lot of time troubleshooting. And so again, I just encourage you to anticipate complications and be prepared for the heat, the humidity, for reduced access to electricity and so forth. So electricity, I mentioned some of the things that we did. We also had some backup equipment, and we brought enough equipment with us that I won't go into detail on the research design, but at any given time, we could be imaging 3 people. But when we weren't imaging 3 people, the 2 extra devices, if we were just imaging 1 person, the 2 extra served as backups for us. So light was a challenge. You see, it's basically open at the top. So we had tons of light coming in. I mentioned the darker area we were in before. This area was all cleared away. There were no trees, no forest. It was cleared away, and we had this gym in the middle of this clear space. So lots of light coming in. So essentially what we end up doing is creating a darker space, because even with a shower cap on, when we had full montages and we had this thick dark hair that we were dealing with, very, very difficult to get good signal quality. So we essentially created a room using a tarp you'll see that we just turned a desk on its top there or on its side, and used the goalpost from the gym that was there and created sort of a little bit darker space. It wasn't super dark, but you can see in this image there's a chair here, and the chair there, at least we're protected a bit from the direct light that was coming in so intensely at times. We also, so you see that again, but here you'll see that for some of the people in fact, all the fathers we worked with had their hair cut short. Most of them were laborers and didn't want to mess with the longer hair. They'd keep their hair cut really short. So we could image them relatively in the open there in the gym, and you'll see there's a shower cap on this person, and that was adequate for them, but it wasn't adequate, especially for the mothers who had very thick, dark, long hair. So you'll see here one of the mothers with a cap on behind in our relatively dark space. And we have a researcher there continuously monitoring signal quality during data collection. So again, our solutions, a fair amount of gel, extensive signal checking, both prior to starting our experiment and during the experiment. We just, in this case, also learned that we were going to have to throw out some data, and we just collected extra data. We used SCI later on because SCI, from my understanding, is better at looking at just quality over the course of the experiment and not at any specific given time. And then I mentioned GLM modeling before to just take care of any differences in terms of numbers. So team training, one thing that you'll see here, these are our families, all there waiting, wanting to be neuroimaged right now. They're ready. They're anxious. They hear about this experiment. They have a chance to participate, to make a little money for participating and so forth. And so we were kind of on the spot. We needed to work through these participants relatively quickly. So it just proved that those of us who were more accustomed to operating fNIRS couldn't do it by ourselves. And so you'll see here that there's a man interviewing from our research team who he was interviewing the fathers after they were neuroimaged, but as a result, he would observe the neuroimaging process as we did it. He's a qualitative social scientist, never done anything like this before, but just by observing, he got a sense for how we would set people up for the experiments. And so you'll see now that he's actually administering the experiment. So he watched us a few times and figured it out. And ultimately, we had a trained team. And that, again, is one of the strengths of fNIRS, especially when you're using something like a headband, which is that's all we did on the fathers was just an 8x8 montage using headbands. And it was pretty straightforward for the fathers. So, and this person here, David, he was an English teacher from a university or college in the south of Ecuador, who also hadn't done this sort of experimentation, but here he is now running the study with one of our participants. And so to me, this just really shows the strength of fNIRS relative. We could have never, I mean, can you imagine someone like that operating an MRI machine? Absolutely not, right? But fNIRS, they can carry out the experiment. So one of our goals also was to give experience, by the way, to these people because we're trying to pass something on to the community. So by having the experience and collecting data and learning more about neuroimaging, these people get excited about education. They get excited about doing research, carrying out research, and we plan to continue to collaborate with them in this longitudinal 10-year study. So I think they'll learn a fair amount of skills during the time that they participate. So we couldn't take something like fans with us, or I say we couldn't. We could have taken them, but we didn't have battery-powered fans. In the future, I would take a battery-powered fan. You see this one that you can buy, that the lithium-ion battery is small enough that you can get away with carrying it in your carry-on luggage. So I would, if when we do it again, we will do it again this next summer, and I plan for each of us to carry one of these little fans for cooling of equipment. And by the way, we had beads of sweat dripping off our people who are neuroimaging. You can imagine leaning over a laptop or leaning over an fNIRS unit, and you have beads of sweat dripping off. You've got water that is not good for an fNIRS unit. So yeah, cooling is important not just for the equipment, but also for the people who are involved. You see here something that we will take next year that we have since come up with. My colleague Shane Boyce at Utah State University, the engineer I mentioned earlier, he created this device that now we will put underneath our NIRsport units. You may ask, what is this? Well, cool air enters the bottom of a NIRsport unit. If you've looked at it, there are vents on the bottom where air moves through. What we do is you have just essentially, it's a little 3D or a printed box that you'll see here. It has holes in the bottom, and we can put some of these dry air packs to take the humidity out in this little box. The air comes through that. And actually, I experimented with this in Belfast, where it's relatively humid and it was a nice hot summer day. I ran the fNIRS unit for over 4 hours continuously, and temperature was great on the unit. And the evidence that I have that it was extracting humidity is that the packet you saw there swelled, and we had to change out those packets. So anyway, that's our solution to humidity. So since we didn't have any questions earlier, I'll move beyond the questions now and talk about something that's more of an on-campus classroom experiment. And this is the head of our Office of Belonging at BYU. You note up there that the words say, I strive to create a community of belonging. So we have great support from the Office of Belonging. We have great support from our Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education, Bryce Bunting, whose name is there, for this idea of helping students to tell about some of their personal struggles, their personal stories, personal successes, personal challenges, specifically as students at the university. And so we have this storytelling event where they come together, they tell these stories, and we're interested in the topics that create belonging, in the discourse markers, in discourse features, in the words that they use, and so forth. And we're looking at everything from theory of mind to emotion and emotion regulation and interbrain synchrony. And so this is my lab team in a theater, all undergraduates sitting at the back, just preparing to neuroimage. We did this on a university campus, and the reason I'm talking about this is you might think that university campus space, straightforward, pretty easy to neuroimage and so forth. But when you have a building that was built in 1911, how many electrical outlets are going to be in that theater that you're going into? And anyone ever heard of Wi-Fi interference in buildings that are made of marble? It's not always easy to get good, clear signals transmitted in a building like this. So we did hyperscanning in this building. You see one speaker who is set up with a headband while she's giving a talk. We had one speaker and we had 4 listeners at the same time, simultaneously being neuroimaged. We had 3 with headbands on and 1 with a more full montage listener being neuroimaged. And this image doesn't represent our setup. It just represents the complexity, the challenges that are there. You might not think about it again in a university setting, but think of the logistics in the first place. This was a public storytelling event with about 100 to 150 people present. And we are taking volunteers and setting up 1 speaker and 4 listeners. The talks were about 4 minutes long. So we're changing out equipment every 4 minutes to 8 minutes. We actually decided 4 minutes wasn't feasible. So we did every other speaker. We were changing out equipment, moving from one speaker to the next. And I won't bore you with the details of what we did with listeners because it wasn't practical to change out listeners every talk or every speech. But logistically, you can imagine that's complicated, and it took a good team. And I showed the undergraduate students who were involved earlier, who were very busy moving headbands from one person to another and so forth. Logistics were challenging. Movement was challenging. You saw the speakers there. You get a sense here for what was happening. We had one person who paced and gestured a lot. So quite a bit of movement. And we had, fortunately, accelerometers on each of these units. So that those accelerometers could collect data on the movement that was occurring. And if you're interested, this QR code sends you to the kind of introduction to these accelerometers by Robert Frank. And so we were able to take out some of that movement, extract some of that movement in our analysis. We also, during pre-processing, if you can, I don't know if you can see this, but we use TDDR to remove motion artifacts as well in our processing of the data. So if you see just on the left, a dirty, kind of messy signal. This is one channel, one participant over the course of one talk. And then on the right, you see the cleaned up data that's been Z-normalized. And similarly, just over the course of one event, you see kind of messier data on the left, cleaner data on the right. That just gives you a sense for what can be done with good pre-processing and so forth. So then, moving on, sorry if I'm going too fast. Uh, I, I knew that talking about 3 studies would be quite a bit, but I want to make sure that you have a chance to ask questions at the end. So electricity, as I said, you might not think was an issue, but we couldn't even find an electrical outlet in the facility to plug in a Wi-Fi an access point. So we actually purchased in advance a Netgear Nighthawk M1, which is awesome. It handled all the data coming through from all 5 of these units very, very well. And we never had signals break up. Um, just an amazing unit. And the fact that it was battery powered was great because we could walk right into the room. Everything was quickly set up. And we could set up anywhere in the room because all of our equipment was battery powered. So that kind of concludes that experiment. I'm sorry if I went too fast, but I'm going to now just I'll stop my sharing for a minute and take questions from you.
All right. So Dan, I think we can start with first thanking you a lot. This is this illustrates very beautifully how versatile fNIRS can be and how if you're willing to do it, you can push the boundaries, and you guys have done that and then some, which to me is just inspiring to see on a personal level, but also on a professional level. Yeah, we have one question from the chat already from George Gillett. George, if you would like to ask your question out loud, you can. Otherwise, I'll read it for you. So, George's question. Oh, George, I see you unmute yourself, so go ahead.
Yeah, I can try. My laptop's not very good, but I'll give it a go. Yeah, the question is just about the humidity in Ecuador and whether it was mainly concerns around the FNIRS unit or whether there was any damage or concern about the headgear itself.
No, we didn't have any damage that we're aware of. I will say that NIRx was amazing in terms of support. Uh, I don't think they anticipated us taking to equipment to Ecuador, our equipment to someplace like the Amazon in Ecuador when they sold us the equipment. So in fairness to them, any challenges we had were not because we weren't aware that there could be challenges. I mean, if you read the specifications, they don't say that you can work in 100% humidity without any problems at all. So, but they did help us. And one thing, just so you'll know, if you expect to get support from NIRx or anyone else while you're imaging in field, they will often want to have the log and where we were, the places I told you about in the second experiment, they were so remote that I had emergency cell phone service where I could call out, but I was not able to do anything with data. So I could call out and talk to them, but there was no way I could transmit the logs to them. So just be aware you're going to encounter problems like that. Yeah, that if you want support, you want to talk to people up front. You want to find out what to anticipate up front. But that's a very long answer to your question, George. But the short of it really is no, that it didn't damage the equipment. And the equipment is spec'd very well. It's spec'd to handle quite a bit. Um, it just it wasn't designed to go to places like that. But I'll tell you from experience that it will. And again, if you anticipate problems, that it can perform very well in the field in situations like this. But you might want to do something like we've done, where we're planning to extract humidity during scanning, during imaging. So people tell me, engineers, chip engineers I've talked to say that really humidity in the cold is more of an issue because you get condensation that becomes a problem there than it is in the heat. Um, I mean, that's just what I'm told by them. But our experience shows that nothing was damaged. Our equipment has functioned well after returning.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, if I may, we learned a lot also from this experience, from Dan's experience, and it was just super nice to work with and to figure out, yeah, the limits of things. If you're planning to go into the Amazon again with our systems or at all with our systems, I would say talk to us and talk to Dan. We can give you more specifics on exactly, the things that they made, like this presentation or review this presentation, because it will be paramount to your success to remove humidity from the devices. And yeah, there's very
So
limited things we can do without full access.
I
Dan,
might
sorry.
also say that we had not had experience collecting back-to-back data all day long using fNIRS units with a montage that was a pretty, I don't remember the specs, but at least 16 by 16 in both cases. 16 sources, 16 detectors at least in both cases. I think larger in both cases. I think we were in the 20s in terms of sources and detectors. So just just that will tax your equipment, I think, running it all day long. So was it humidity, heat and humidity, or was it heat and humidity combined with the intense kind of data collection that we were doing? And I'd recommend, if you can, if you have the luxury to have breaks, but you saw the people who are standing there waiting, the practical logistics were such that, I mean, we were drained by the end of the day because we had more volunteers, and it was good that we had so many volunteers come because we had extra data and we could throw out the messy channels.
Beautiful. Thanks, Dan. I see there's no more questions in the chat. Please, people. Oh, there we go. We have a question from a raised hand. So, Andrew, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Dewey, for this really wonderful talk, and it's amazing to see all the work you've done outside the lab. Just a couple of quick questions. You know, most of my research again was in a lab setting, so it was fairly easy to get participants and recruit participants in the sense of, getting participant explaining the study and then having pretty much good compliance. Would you say logistically, was it challenging for you to get participants and in terms of compliance with data collection in general and, motion artifacts, that sort of stuff? I guess is my first question. And if I may ask another quick question, if you were to go back and change something, you mentioned taking the gel, taking portable fans with batteries.
Right.
Anything else you could think of that you would potentially change, even from like an experimental design or how you recruit participants or anything like that? I think just having that knowledge would also be very valuable. Thank you.
Right. So really quick, in terms of compliance, just I laugh because I've gathered data in lab on campus, and students complain about putting even a headband on at times and the discomfort. And we had a woman an elderly woman in the Amazon who said, "Oh, this feels good. It feels like when I'm carrying a load in the field because they carry things on their head all the time." And she liked it. So actually, she went out afterwards and she told other people in the community, "You really should go do this. It's great, and you get paid for it." And so we had no problems recruiting people there. The men you saw who were in the gym, we gave them each a pocket knife for participating, something that they wouldn't, a really nice pocket knife, multi-tool. And it wasn't worth a lot. They were pretty cheap for us, but they couldn't find something like that out there in the Amazon. So they were motivated to come. They just were like, "Hey, I want that tool, that multi-tool." And so we got men who we didn't anticipate having come because of that multi-tool. So as far as so that kind of answers compliance and willingness, and just people were very patient. That when we were spending 20 minutes trying to get good signals, people just sat there quietly, no complaints. Um, yeah, I mean, just it tells you a little bit how jaded our university students can be sometimes, who are maybe participating in the study. They're used to the comforts of life, right? So yeah, that was very nice to have them so willing and patient and so forth. And then in terms of things we would do differently, um, I yeah, I guess it's more something for me as a collaborator. I um, jump in when there's an opportunity there, and mostly I am a strong advocate for fNIRS. So when I see an opportunity in us to look at an authentic social and linguistic question, I'll dive right in and collaborate with people. And so really, it's more of a lesson for me to just take a little more time, plan a little more, and anticipate some of these things. But sometimes you have a window of opportunity, and if you don't act, the window is gone. With this Utah State collaboration, they already had this set up, but they didn't plan on neuroimaging. And that neuroimaging added so much more because they were looking at cognitive development, and we plan on doing that over 10 years. So, yeah. So jumping in at that point was just, it seemed like the right thing to do because it was a longitudinal piece where we could look at questions that I'm interested in as a scientist and researcher.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So I will move to the questions that were asked prior to the webinar, just so we can keep the ball rolling. Some of them were already answered, like specific strategies for experiments or tasks performed outside of the lab. I think this was discussed at length. Maybe this one. This one is very nice. I would like Professor Dan to elaborate on what new projects his lab is working on currently and discuss future avenues.
Okay. Okay. So one of the things, so I am not, I'm as a linguist, my training was in Asian languages. I do Japanese, Korean, and a little bit of Chinese, and I started in Asia, but I uh, am have moved on to working with colleagues who speak indigenous languages in South and Central America, and that's and you think of the weird population that has been neuroimaged so many times, and we're already seeing the potential to find differences in non-weird populations in settings where the children, some of them don't even go to school, and but cognitively they're amazing. I sat there at a dinner table with a child who knew every spider in the forest and picked one up and was playing with it, and his father said, "Oh, we don't worry about him. He knows which ones are dangerous, and he knows the names of all of them." And So looking at cognitive development and bilingualism, they're all raised bilingually. Their grandparents typically speak Quechua, and their parents speak Spanish and often some combination. So they're raised bilingually. So looking at these children and also looking at the adults, there are elderly people in their 80s and 90s who are incredibly healthy and cognitively incredibly bright. And they speak as many as I met one woman who spoke 8 languages. And so for me, looking at the linguistic and cognitive abilities of people as they age in the Amazon is very interesting. And that is where I plan to spend a fair amount of time down the road. So, oh, by the way, I do have a group in Cambodia, in a very remote location there. That my interest in Asia has got me collaborating with someone who looks at Chinese diaspora, kind of Chinese communities around the world. So there are people who speak Chinese and several other languages in Cambodia that I'm interested in, and have many. There's much overlap, many similarities there between that group and the group in Ecuador. So I plan to do work there too.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dan. I think we are 1 minute away from our time. I believe most of the questions were addressed. If you have further questions, as I said in the beginning, please make sure you can get in touch with us and we can route them to Dan. And yeah, once again, a big thank you from us and from the audience. This is amazing work and it needs to be shared. Yeah, with that, I think we can close out the webinar for today.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, thanks everyone. Bye.